colleagues, allow me on behalf of the organizing committee to welcome you all to our second Digital Humanities Institute at the American University of Beirut. This year's event builds on sustained effort to host digital humanities related events which has been made since 2013 at AUB. They include Digital Humanities at AUB 2013, various fora, undergraduate and graduate courses offered in the Department of English and in collaboration with the Department of Computer Science, the Digital Humanities Institute 2015, and the faculty learning community in digital humanities. This event aims to foster a culture of openness in teaching and research in the digital humanities, as well as to encourage growth of communities of practice by providing digital humanities training with a regional focus. It is founded on the principles of co-teaching and co-learning among a community of faculty, librarians, and instructional design staff. We hope the second iteration will build upon progress made in both research and community building in Lebanon, extending outward to Egypt, the UAE, Central Asia, Ghana, France, Greece, and the 27 members of the Amical Consortium, including the Lebanese American University, Hagazian, and the University of Balamand. All of this has been made possible by the generous support of the Center for Arts and Humanities in collaboration with the Department of English, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Amical Consortium, University Libraries, Office of Information Technology, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, Center for American Studies and Research, Qaysar. And by the amazing efforts of the organizing committee, allow me please to list their names: Rayan Fayed, IT, Mary Hawat, English major, Fatima Sharafuddin, University Libraries, David WRISLEY, English, along with Marwal Rose from the Department of English and the IT group on the ground. Special thanks are due to our local, regional, and international trainers who have joined us during this very time in the spring semester. Last but not least, thanks to all of you for joining us today to enrich our DH conversations and help us build bridges across. Allow me now to invite Professor Nadia Al-Sheikh, Dean of Arts and Sciences, to give her opening speech. Dean Nadia Maria Al-Sheikh is the first female dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at AUB. She is a historian of the Abbasid Caliphate and Byzantium, with research focus on women and gender. She has published 3 history books and co-edited 3 edited volumes, including AUB 150 in 2016. In addition, she has delivered more than 100 published articles, reviews, invitational lectures, and conference workshop papers. Dean Nadia.
Thank you, Najla. Thank you all for being here, and welcome to AUB. The Faculty of Arts and Sciences is proud to be hosting the second iteration of the Digital Humanities Institute in Beirut. Digital humanities are new methods of thought and learning that involve collaborative, interdisciplinary, and technologically engaged research, pedagogy, and preservation. Digital humanities is created from the encounters between traditional humanities and computational methods, 2 areas in which AUB excels. The English department at AUB continues to rise to the challenge of new ways of teaching, seeing, and expanding the humanities, just as the Department of Computer Science, the Office of Information Technology, and the university libraries have to create a new, original school of thought for the digital age. The Faculty of Arts and Sciences considers digital humanities to be a vital new horizon for scholarship in the 21st century. We also recognize the wide possibilities for new ways of producing knowledge offered by radical cooperation between modern technology and our commitment to humanities and liberal arts. Openness is a core tenet of our faculty's philosophy. Openness to radical ideas, openness to different lenses, and to the opportunities created when ideas migrate across and between the disciplines. Through the study of digital humanities, we allow our students not only to engage in humanistic inquiry, but also to understand the vast web of potential offered by the migration of cultural materials into new digital environments. We press them to ask questions not only about what they have learned, but also how they have learned them. We are at the cutting edge of a new wave of thinking. You here today are all engaged in an experiment. The physical space and the digital space are overlapping as we search for new localities of knowledge and new practices for Lebanon and the region as a whole to engage with and expand communities of thought. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nicholas Kristof puts it very well when he says, "What use would the humanities be in a digital age? The humanities are not only relevant, but also give us a toolbox to think seriously about ourselves and the world." End quote. Here at the UB, our students are already engaged in projects to analyze the vital ephemera of Beirut. The Linguistic Landscape Project records how Lebanon's multilingualism is expressed in public space in written form, and have made their work available to all as an interactive map. The Mapping Beirut Print Center, also hosted at the AUB, explores the spatio-temporal dimension of print culture in Beirut, using a historical investigation into the last 100 years of printing and distribution of Lebanese literature. Using archival materials and printed maps, they are creating a historical and political record of the city, which encourages thought and discussion of issues affecting people living today in Beirut, such as gentrification, the commercialization of cultural spaces, and the rise of electronic publishing. These new frontiers have been made possible only in the 21st century and only through an openness to incorporating the ideals and goals of humanities-centered inquiries into our cultures and the modern world through digital engagement. Digital work challenges the separations of qualitative and quantitative scholarship and the separations between theory and practice. It keeps our history current and our futures open and creates a new dimension within the core of liberal arts and information technology education from which we will all benefit. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you a successful and stimulating exchange. After the success of the event in 2015, I am certain the next 2 days will be as rewarding, as thought-provoking, and as vital. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second welcome note will be given by Dr. Yusuf Raja Asfour, our Chief Information Officer since 2014. Dr. Asfour is a seasoned technology executive with more than 25 years of experience in the US and the Middle East. He has been leading the IT team at AUB for the past 2 years and a half and has been driving positive changes in IT and leading the transformation of the Information Technology Department into a strategic partner with the academic units. Professor Asfour.
Thank you. I'll try to be short. Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to AUB and to the Digital Humanities Institute for 2017. But I'd also like you to think about something. I'd like you to think about why is it that when people talk about technology in teaching and research, they mostly mean the implementation of that technology in engineering and science, never consider it in the humanities. This is really inaccurate. In fact, it's so wrong at so many levels. In fact, at my previous role at NYU Abu Dhabi, the humanities were actually the IT's biggest customer. They were my biggest source of pay because they asked for most of the work. But the reason for that was because basically the technology needs in support of the humanities far exceeded the needs of engineering and science combined. I'll give you an example. In order to support the fine arts course, we had to upgrade our network, we had to upgrade our projectors, we also had to upgrade our storage infrastructure and everything else in between to support the needs of a fine arts course. In fact, what we are seeing now is this is also beginning to happen at AUB. We're beginning to see that the demands from the humanities at AUB for technology are rising. This is similar to all the kinds of demands that are happening for IT in other institutes as well. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you want to do a history research project, for example, you need sophisticated algorithms and raw compute power just to do the analysis of and contrast and compare historical documents. In order to better understand literature, you probably need documents that need to be digitized, analyzed, compared and contrasted by using some state-of-the-art artificial intelligence techniques, utilizing some of the fastest computers around. Although we may be able to get away without the use of contextual analysis, document comparison, sentiment analysis, handwriting analysis, syntactic and semantic analysis, and the use of high-resolution images in the sciences, we cannot get away from that in the humanities. The sophisticated use of and analysis of what technologists like to call unstructured data is at the core of what humanities do. And in order to scale our abilities to review, analyze, understand these unstructured contexts found in the humanities, we need advanced and sophisticated technologies such as optical character recognition, voice and facial recognition, artificial intelligence, big data storage and analysis, high-performance computing, and the list goes on. I would therefore argue that although science and engineering provide us with the tools and algorithms and compute power that we need, it is the needs of the humanities that are driving the advancement of these technologies. Although the role of digital technology is to expand the tool set available to the humanities, it is up to you guys, the humanities folks, to apply those digital tools and advance their field, and in the process push us technologists to our limit, so that we can help you develop the next tools so you can advance the field further. In my view, the humanities is and should continue to be the reason why we develop technology and provide technology services at teaching and research institutions. With that in mind, I hope that you'll take full advantage of the next couple of days to attend as many workshops as you can, interact with as many speakers as you can, and network with as many people as you can find so that you can learn more about what technology can do, apply them in your research, and push us to advance the tools. As a friend of mine once told me, technology is not truly accepted until artists and humanists start incorporating it into their work and daily life. Well, the fact that we're discussing digital humanities is a testament to the fact that digital technology has finally come of age. And I hope you take full advantage of that. Thank you for coming. I hope you have a great time.
Thank you, Professor Asfour. Mr. Eli Kahale will talk on behalf of the University Libraries as head of the Digital Initiative at AUB. AUB Libraries is a pioneer in the region to start a digital initiative aiming at featuring some of its precious and historical collections that have been acquired for 150 years now. Mr. Eli.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of AUB Digital Humanities Institute.
Taller than me, so just yeah.
Can you listen? Can you hear me? It's my pleasure to represent AUB Library in this event, in its second edition. I remember well attending a workshop on digital humanities at AUB in 2013, in which it stressed on how the humanities are undergoing a rapid series of change in the digital age. 2 years later, back in 2015, we participated in the first AUB Digital Humanity event, and we had the chance to present some of our initiatives, and we did participate in several workshops. The Institute provided an environment to learn about new technology and their impact on humanities. The University Library considers that these events are very important and are privileged and are aligned with its vision to be committed to supporting lifelong learning and scholarship, providing a welcoming, resource-rich, innovative, and stimulating environment, embracing collaborative opportunities, and to cultivating a technological, enhanced, user-centric setting for the discovery, creation, organization, preservation, and communication of knowledge. This year, the University Library continued to participate in these events with more commitment by joining the efforts made to organize such events with full engagement that the DHI is founded on the principle of co-learning, co-teaching among a community of faculty, librarians, and instructional design colleagues. It's also important to note that this year the outreach made outward, especially by reaching for the 27 members of the Amicus Consortium. In the book Digital Humanity, published by MIT in 2012, if you are interested, you can find the link to the book on the DHI website. The author stated that curation, analysis, editing, and modeling comprise fundamental activities of the core of the digital humanities. They also mentioned this activity depends on the basic building block of digital activity, which are digitization, classification, description and metadata, organization and navigation, which are also the main activities in the library and the digital libraries era. A university library eagerly developed throughout the years and continue to develop a precious and historical collection that can be considered among the most important collections in the region. In the last decade, the university library started increasing its digital collection, and only in the last few years, the amount of storage required to preserve and manage some of these digital collections increased to reach 25 terabytes of data. And we expect to produce, collect, and develop another 25 terabytes of data for digital content only during this year, 2017. I'm going to list some of the digital initiatives and projects that are related to these digital collections, which open the door to several opportunities for collaboration towards increasing research and scholar work in several areas and in different perspectives. First, the university library has created an institutional repository to retain the intellectual output of the university students and faculty and to support open access trend in scholarly communication and publishing. Several digital initiatives were recently launched to make information easily located and accessible online. As a start, the university library are making accessible several archival collections and different periodical accessible online. One of these projects is a collaboration with Dar al-Adab to build Al-Adab Digital Archive. The project includes the digitization, Arabic text OCRing, indexing, adding descriptive metadata, and preservation to the entire run of Al-Adab magazine that ranges from 1953 till 2012. Also, the AUB library have joined the Arabic Collection online project, a 5-year project funded by UNORC Abu Dhabi, which aims to digitize and make accessible worldwide a large collection of Arabic books that are in the public domain. Partners in this project include the Library of New York, Columbia, Cornell, Princeton University, and recently the American University of Cairo. In addition, the library is working on relaunching the initiated Oasis project, a union list of series from and about the Middle East listing titles and pointing to holding institutions. This project hopes to facilitate scholarly access to these periodicals throughout the world. From another perspective, the university libraries are working on preserving cultural heritage of Lebanon and the region by preserving and creating digital archive for renowned leaders. Currently, the library is developing the Kamal Joublar Digital Archive in order to make resources on Joublar freely and conveniently accessible to scholars, students, and general readers. Another important initiative in partnership with Isam Faiz Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at AUB, the Nakba Archive, and the Arab Resource Center for Popular Arts Al-Jama is the Palestinian Oral History Archive. It's an archival collection that contains more than 1,000 alif of testimonies with first-generation Palestinians and other Palestinian communities in Lebanon. The project will digitize, index, catalog, preserve, and provide access to the material throughout the creation of a digital platform. AUBUR signed an agreement with the publisher to start a joint project between the University Library and Brill to index the Arabic standard journals. Using Index Islamicus platform and indexing techniques, the project proposes indexing the journal concept in Arabic and English language, developing an ontology of Nahda term and concept, and building authority list of proper names of people, places, and organizations. To conclude, I would like to emphasize that we should capitalize on this initiative and any digital scholar initiative by investing towards a stable environment that allows us to sustain this platform information, digital tools, and others in the sole purpose of fostering research and scholar work. I wish you all a fruitful participation, collaboration in this event, and hopefully leading to future cooperation and research advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kahane. I would now like to welcome the Director of Amical Consortium, Mr. Jeff Gima. Jeff Gima has led the Amical Consortium since its founding in 2004. Jeff has been instrumental in shaping the mission of the consortium, which facilitates collaboration between librarians, technologists, and faculty at American international liberal arts institutions.
Thanks and good morning. I want to thank a few people and then explain how this event relates to the Amical Consortium. So I'm going to start by thanking the Andrew W. Foundation for providing the grant funding that allows Amical to support initiatives like this one across our member institutions. Thank you to Dean Al-Sheikh, to the American University of Beirut as an institution, and to the various offices here that are supporting this event. And in particular, I wanted to single out the Center for Arts and Humanities and its director, Abdul Hussein, who has played a larger role than Amical in providing financial support for this event. Big thank you to the organizing committee, who has worked so hard to put this great event together. And thank you in particular to David WRISLEY, who I want to thank not only for providing the inspiration and leadership for this event, but also for the critical leadership that he's provided in this area as the chair of Amical's Digital Scholarship Committee for the past few years. And just so that the other Amical members here know their faces, could the other members of Amical's Digital Scholarship Committee just raise their hands? In addition to David, there's Ryan Fayed. Actually, I'm looking specifically for the members of the Digital Scholarship Committee, just so that the other Amical members might be able to connect with them. So Ryan Fayed and Alex Armstrong and Mark Nielauser, I think, was not able to join us this week. But the Amical members, go ahead and raise your hands to Amical members. So how does this event intersect with the Amical Consortium? The original proposal that David made to Amical in seeking funding for this event stated that the event aimed to, among other things, quote, encourage growth of communities of practice by providing digital humanities training with a regional focus. It is founded, he says, on the principles of co-learning and co-teaching of a community of faculty, librarians, and instructional design staff, unquote. It would be hard to come up with an event planning statement that better fits Amical's own organizational values and its current strategic priorities. Amical is all about peer-to-peer co-learning and co-teaching across our community of librarians, faculty, and technologists. And our mission is basically to connect people who take a thoughtful interest in the role that the library and the technology has in our students' learning and research. And in the past few years, Amical has been helping its members to focus in particular on digital initiatives that are integrated with curricular goals. So through Amical's online communities, and our main member forum, Amical Connect, is linked from our website. Through our small grant program, and through our consortium's own annual conference, and through our workshop sponsorship program, which is partially supporting this event, Amical is helping members to build, to share, and to connect. So we're creating spaces and opportunities for discovering together how we can use digital methods and resources to build and to develop the value of our unique local educational and scholarly assets. So those unique assets might range from source materials like locally produced photo collections of digital Parisian architecture, for example, range from source materials to people like faculty working on spatial patterns of language use across Beirut. Digital methods can be a game changer, enabling global access to research materials that were previously restricted, or allowing fundamentally new research questions to be posed. And so Amical is helping its members to develop those digital methods, to develop and showcase their unique local resources. And more generally, we're helping our members to adapt our regional versions of liberal education to the increasingly digital environment. So whether we're talking about digital curation or digital literacy or digital humanities, Amical's common ground is our shared interest in how we engage with information in its various forms. The goal shared across Amical members is to cultivate that field of information use and creation embedded in fascinating layers of French or Nigerian or Lebanese culture, history, and politics in order to develop a critical and exceptional learning and research experience for our students. So thank you all, Amical members and others, for coming here and helping us to push that conversation forward this week.
Allow me now to introduce our first keynote, Dr. David WRISLEY. Dr. WRISLEY is an associate professor in the Department of English at AUB, and in 2016-17, visiting associate professor of digital humanities at New York University, Abu Dhabi. His digital interests include maps and networks in literature studies, forms of distant reading in medieval French, as well as different aspects of the spatial humanities, including historical gazetteers, participatory mapping, and the social creation of spatial data. The digital projects he contributes to include visualizing medieval places, linguistic landscapes of Beirut, and mapping Beirut print culture. Dr. WRISLEY founded DHABI in 2015. The title of his keynote is Digital Humanities in the Arab World, Current Context and Future Perspectives.
I'm going to sit, so for the streaming, I'm going to sit at the table here. And I put this over here and stand over here. Can I just take this? Okay, give me just 1 second to get started up. Thank you. For those of you watching live stream, the slides of my presentation are available at tinyurl.com/DHIB WRISLEY, my last name. And for those of you in the room who don't like to read small print but want to see it on the device in front of you, you can do the same thing. So the term digital humanities is not one that has a lot of purchase in the academic and research institutions in our region, at least for now. It's an imported framework from the Anglo-European academic world, not only to our Arab world context, but to many places around the world where the term and the praxis of digital humanities has been translated into various world languages, and as we heard from the UNCLOS representative, Jeff Lima, into different forms of pedagogy around the world. So sitting in Lebanon in 2017, we know about it because we hear about it taking place in other academic environments with which we're in dialogue and which we imitate, to be frank, in our scholarly lives. It's not an easily definable field, but according to many digital humanists I know, it is basically a converging array of practices rather than a discipline that brings us together around questions of method. So since many of you here are probably new to this field and you've come looking for something like an introduction, I suggest that we turn to some of the ways that the field is actually speaking for itself. And so in the English-speaking world, some of the digital humanities community have turned this question of debates, right, into, actually, give me 1 second. Before we do that, I want to give you the outline of my talk. So we're going to go first with definitions, and that's where we're going to turn and look at what this English-speaking world is talking about, some of the ways that it's self-representing. We're going to talk about the question of whether digital humanities is a global phenomenon or not. We're going to look at some tentative Arab world beginnings. We're going to think about how we talk about DH in Arabic. I'm going to show some examples of exemplary project-based research, and the adjective project-based is going to be very important for what my talk is about today. I'll get to it in just a little bit. And then I'm going to finish with something which is a new project for me called Towards a History of Arab Computing, a Past for the Present Future. And then finally, I'll just give a couple words that try to link what we actually have on offer at DHIB in terms of the courses to some of the things that I've said during my talk. So in this English-speaking world, some of the digital humanities community have turned debate over definitions into a kind of productive performance of diversity. A colleague at Stanford, Jason Hepler, had the clever idea of buying the domain whatisdigitalhumanities.com, which pulls quotes from a list of digital practitioners, things that they've said during a one-day annual event important for the digital humanities community called Day of DH. It takes place in April, so put it on TweetDeck, watch for it, hashtag Day of DH 2017. But the idea there is to blog, to tweet, or otherwise to communicate the daily practices of the digital humanist in a public setting, first, to demystify the term that it may have with its potential detractors, but also to instruct what the daily research life of a digital humanist might be. So, if you've got a device on you, I hope you don't crash this by all going to it, whatisdigitalhumanities.com, you can go to it, and every time you reload the page, you get a different definition. And so I invite you to play with that a little bit as I talk. And each time, and the data set's actually available on GitHub, which is another thing we do as digital humanists. We put our data out there for other people to use. Hopefully, we'll use it in more interesting ways than we ever imagined. So the one problem that I do have with this, what is digital humanities? I actually have two problems with what is digital humanities. I have a problem with grammar, which is I think digital humanities are a plural. Sort of like data, right? We often say data is, data are, and you actually will probably hear me over the course of my talk fluctuate in speech between digital humanities is and digital humanities are. But it's important, and I think this particular site gives us this idea of the plurality and the diversity that exists in such a field, such a discipline, such an array of convergent practices, as they say. So the other problem that I have with this is that this is largely in English and coming from Western countries. And so I think the question that we're going to want to ask ourselves over the course of my talk, but over the course of the next 2.5 days, is also, what does that actually look like? What does it look like? See, I did it again. What do they look like, those digital humanities, when they move to other parts of the world? We have a talk coming up in Abu Dhabi in April of someone saying that actually digital humanities should not be the term that we use in the rest of the world, because it ties us to specific kinds of practices that come from the West. So let me give some examples. I'm just going to pull on some ones that I found, which I thought were kind of interesting. So right, at its simplest, DH, meaning digital humanities, is the utilization of computers and computational tools for exploration, analysis, and production of humanistic knowledge. Jen Giuliano from Indiana. This is a reading of DH that puts analysis, sort of almost big data analysis, at the fore, right? It's one of those ways that digital humanities becomes read as more means of distant reading. Let's take the next one. Famous figure, Matt Jockers, my teacher for the R programming language from Nebraska. I think digital humanities is a vague and ambiguous term. In fact, I think it causes a fair amount of confusion both inside and outside the academy. It's an umbrella term that, depending on who you're talking to, covers a huge territory, everything from applied text analysis and corpus stylistic to the more esoteric and theoretical realms of video game criticism. And what I love about that is that even though he calls it vague, it's almost like Matt Jocker's description of the vague and ambiguous term of DH actually embraces everything we're going to be doing in the next 2 days, right? 2.5 days. Isabel Galina from the UNAM in Mexico says, for this project, we're going to use the broadest definition of digital humanities, interdisciplinary field that seeks to understand and impact the relationship of computing and humanities. By DH projects, we're seeking to document websites, databases, tools, digitization projects, CVs, etc., etc. We are aware that some DH projects can overlap with digital libraries, teaching aids, and digital learning objects. Big, strong emphasis on library and pedagogy in that definition. Next one, digital humanities, this is from Sharon Cudgeville in Minnesota, is the informed, intentional use of digital objects and practices to create and study the humanities broadly defined. In that sense, it's a specialization that cuts across disciplinary boundaries to the work of digital humanists in other disciplines. It is also the insistence that the humanities comes to understand the implications of its assumption that only print technologies exist. And it is the insistence that the humanities learns that no technology is invisible, natural, or inevitable, and that someday all humanists will be digital. There's a lot in this definition, like lots packed in there. A few will specialize in print, chirographic, or oral culture humanities. And then my favorite one of all, to the answer, how do you define digital humanities? Lorna Richardson from the UK says, not sure. So from that space, right, of amazing sort of contested opinions, diversity, different collations of university and non-university environments around the question of information, we begin. So I tried to do this on day of DH 2016, injecting a little bit of Arabic into this, right? So you'll actually see a tweet in the middle there, right? Sabah al-khair, right? Right? And I put in there that we were actually doing something in Lebanon, right? So we joined this conversation of day of DH 2016. And what I love about it is that then it got picked back up, that question of reuse. It got picked back up by somebody else who did something with it, namely he mapped it, right? Something that we love to do in digital humanities. It points to a kind of, also I think, a kind of playful and open dialogue that exists globally, right, between people. So I'm going to return to this question of a multilingual DH, in particular a DH in Arabic a little bit later in my talk. It is really important for me, and this is like if we look at this, you know, the definition in Spanish is a plural, right? It's really important to me that it's a plural, actually. And I will come back to that and I'll talk about that if anybody wants to. So, let's see here. So I'd like to just say a little tiny bit about Arabic, right? Arabic has a plural too. That's a feminine singular, actually, that's a plural. And we do actually have an Arabic, we have a discourse about Arabic, about DH in Arabic. It exists. It's very spread out, it's very sparse, and as I use in my introductory outline, it's very tentative. I begin, not completely, which I'll explain later, with Hassan Rad's book in 2014, L'Insegnante Alchemia. And then there's a scholar, named Zaki from Tunis, who has a DH in Arabic WordPress that he runs. Hasn't been updated since 2015, but nonetheless, it was a bit of a splash after that particular book. And then I've taken a stab at this with a document about what is DH in Arabic, but trying to do it for an Arabic-speaking audience in a tab on our conference for Abu Dhabi in 2017. And that post is called Limada Dog. So I'd like to move on to this question about an international or a global DH, right? I gave a talk, an earlier and a shorter version of this talk in Mexico City in October of last year at a gathering of digital humanists at the Colegio de Mexico. And I bring this up not because, just to tell you my CV, right? But because not too long ago, the digital humanities were a new topic in Latin America too. But thanks to pioneering work of people in Mexico and in Cuba and in Argentina and their diasporas in the Western world, and some key institutions that were invested in making that happen, digital humanities in Latin America have emerged as a very vibrant community of research. In fact, I chose to give this talk in Mexico City precisely because I wanted the red, as they call it, their network, to respond to it. I saw it as a very close community to what's actually beginning to happen around me and around the people that I know who are doing digital humanities in the Arab world. So if you were to if you know Spanish, or even if you don't, you can just copy the words. You go in Google right now, Humanidades Digitales, you'll find a whole series of interesting special issues in journals, regional associations, master's degrees, laboratories of innovation, and all over Spain and Latin America. Now, that doesn't mean that all of these places are on equal ground with respect to what they're doing, but they're in this really productive dialogue. You do the same on Twitter, which has been the open medium of choice for the exchange of ideas and professional networking amongst digital humanists for many years. You will find that network of scholars in that red, that network of Latin American digital humanists. So in 2018, the annual conference of ADHO, which is the umbrella organization of the National and Regional Digital Humanities Associations around the world, is taking place in Mexico City. In 2017, the conference is taking place in Montreal, and there was another one in 2014 in Lausanne. Now, if you follow my logic here, it won't surprise you to know that in 2016, a Francophone Association of Digital Humanities became a member of that organization. So even though these associations pull together transnational relationships, old and new world, of language and culture, the majority of work labeled explicitly as digital humanities takes place inside of G8, or rather we should probably say G7 countries. Certainly, most of the conferences that we have seen take place in the G20 countries. okay, including countries of the European Union. So it would seem that the institutionalization of digital humanities organizations maps rather well onto the more developed national infrastructures of research in industrialized countries, or at least it has up to this point. So it seems to me that we're witnessing, we're not really witnessing a rise of global digital humanities, but rather like in the argument put forth by Farhad Khan's book, Connectography, namely, we are witnessing the emergence of new nodes in parts of the world that have less to do with their countries, their nation states, as they do with their historical connection to global academic networks. So instead of calling this phenomenon a global digital humanities, which you saw there was a question mark next to it, I would say that it's worth framing the question about as a growth of digital humanities as a networked phenomenon. And I like the metaphor of a network better for talking about the digital humanities spread in the world today, because network has all kinds of concomitant sub-metaphors to it of centrality, directionality, weight, and influence, which help us think about those relationships. This is where a multinational consortium such as Amical, one of the sponsors of this event today, for the next couple of days, might leverage its influence and be the most impactful as a conduit for innovation via these emergent transnational nodes that are built on top of historical networks of global academia. So the case of Latin America is an interesting one, since common bonds of language and mobility have allowed for engagement with and critique of Western imported digital humanities in a variety of environments. But let us not forget that there are stronger nodes in that red, right, in that network, than others. And there are also emergent communities. So what I would like to claim to you today is that in Arab countries, we also have emergent communities in the digital humanities. Lebanon, the UAE, Tunisia, a little bit Morocco, to some extent Egypt. And it will be fascinating to chart over the next 5 to 10 years, not only where the digital humanities emerge as a first or a second event, but where they will be supported, cultivated, and sustained. Other communities to keep your eyes out for in coming years are India, China, Nigeria, South Africa, etc. There are more that I have not mentioned here. So the question is, if we think about that metaphor of directional or different kinds of nodes in a network of global digital humanities, or that network digital humanities, will South-South digital humanities emerge in coming years? I think that the answer lies in regional commitment to computing and infrastructure, as I'm going to explain a little bit later in the talk. So it might be said that digital humanities spread really fast throughout the world. People have talked about that, and that's kind of the other part about the global digital humanities, is it's a fast moving. But is that actually right? I mean, can we actually liken the digital humanities to the introduction, generalization, and commercialization of new forms of media? Say the daguerreotype in 1849, or the Kodachrome in 1935, the television after 1945, or the smartphone in the late 2000s. Digital humanities did not spread, I would claim, in the same way, because they're not simply about the commercialization of new tools, but they're about changing information and thinking environments, changing knowledge environments in the world. And so that intersects with new tools being available, but it's that they are simply ways of carrying out what communities want to do with knowledge. Now this might surprise people in the room who come from far and wide to learn about new tools, learn about new techniques and new functionality for carrying out research in the humanities. But what you work with today won't necessarily be with what you're working with tomorrow. So if you're familiar with the new set of interviews published last year in the Los Angeles Review of Books about the digital humanities, if you're not, you should go look at them. You'll be familiar with one article in particular that critiqued the advancement of the digital humanities as an incursion of neoliberal tools and archives into academia. And the specific political history that has allowed that author's claim to be corroborated. Now, there are grains of truth, perhaps, in such a claim, right, about the changing of the academic environment that we live in nowadays. But that article doesn't provide enough context, in my opinion, for making such a claim. It is not the pure existence of an infrastructure that will fuel innovation in the humanities. You cannot always build it so that they will come. However, critical investigations, I think, are stacking up that make the claim that the interwoven history of academic pursuits, and let us just bracket that and limit ourselves to the humanities here, that those academic pursuits and technology are interwoven and that history runs deeper than most of us would like to actually know. Well, sorry, not actually like to know, that most of us know or remember. So, since we don't have a regional association spanning the various Arabic countries, Arabic-speaking countries, nor an annual conference, some might say that it's too early to talk about digital humanities in the Arab world, which of course makes it silly for you to have come here and listen to me go on for this amount of time, right? But I'd like to convince you today that the talk about the world, the DH in this particular world that we live in, the time for it is actually now, to think about how we intelligently structure and plan those relationships between knowledge, production, and infrastructures. We do have labs, after all. We have centers, we have meetups, we have institutes, we have workshops, we have courses, we have funded initiatives, we have grants, as well as the connective tissue and the money, right, that begins to grease that machine. The professional organizations and consortia that sit amongst and between our institutions have just started taking notice, and it's piqued their interest. So, where in the world, right, is DH? We see this map that I put up a couple minutes ago. This is from CenterNet, and I believe that the link is actually wrong, but maybe not. I just looked at it, it seems like a typo. But you can see that these are represented, right, the locations of research centers around the world doing digital humanities work. Are concentrated in certain parts of the world, and they're concentrated in certain parts of the world where we have powerful academic institutions. They're also concentrated in particular in the eastern United States and in Western Europe, but not exclusively. We see some other interesting examples around the world, in South Africa, in Brazil. We see one up in Russia, right? And but for me, and this map is not up to date because there are new nodes that have emerged since then. But what I'd like to claim is that a map doesn't really do this justice. The map pushes us towards thinking about it as a global phenomenon. And what we actually need to think about is what people are working between those centers together for knowledge production. And then also who is helping establish centers in new parts of the world, right? And that's that network idea that I'm actually talking about. So what do digital humanities look like? This is what you've been waiting for in the talk, I think. What do they look like in the Arab world? Well, we've got a lot of examples. Amy gave us some examples of lots of things that are happening in libraries in terms of digital humanities. But the talk that I'm going to give can I keep talking, or great? So what do these? So what do these actually? What I'm going to talk about today is actually not libraries, and I'm not going to talk about digitization, which is what we talk about a lot here, right? How do we get archives into a format where they are either preserved, sustained, or reworked, or whatever? I'm not going to actually talk about that. I'm going to focus my energy on what I might call project-based digital humanities, by which I mean where you actually have a group of people of different interests working together toward the collective creation of knowledge. So don't be angry if I don't mention your project in the room. There's a lot of people out there who do lots of things, right? I don't have time today to talk about all of them. I just put a representative sample of things together. I'm going to talk about that later. So we have events and we have institutions. Balamand in the north of Lebanon has created a center. We've had events in Cairo. We've had events in Beirut. Some of you in the room have been there. We had a thing called that camp many years ago. That's in the Eastern Arabic world. We also have things that are starting in a very different kind of a field to happen in the Maghreb, which would be interesting, Maghreb al-Arabi, to see what happens there. The two players that jump out here are Tunisia and Morocco. Tunisia working very closely with French institutions as in the center. We also have journalism journalism engaging with the idea of digital humanities. The person whose work I would suggest that you take a look at is Dalia Asam from Egypt, who writes for Sharq al-Awsat, the Arabic paper based in London. But we also find, with a search of Institute of Academia and digital humanities and Humanité Numérique for the press, the Francophone press, small articles in the Nahar, the National in Abu Dhabi, and the Arab Weekly in London. So we have a group of journalists who are actually interested in this and who are actually beginning to engage with and expand the terminology with which we want to talk about digital humanities. We also have some centers. We have the center at the Lebanese University, which has been around for a long time, which you might hear about from Hassan Murad, right? The Centre des Sciences du Langage, based in computational linguistics. We have the Center for Digital Scholarship in Abu Dhabi, Department of Digital Humanities in Balamand, the Biblioteca Alexandrina in Alexandria, and then all of those things that go on in all the different libraries. So, project gallery. In collaboration with Balamand Center, we have now a virtual modern art museum. It's not going to work very well on your tablets, and you need to have a good connection for it to function. But it's a virtual reality, right? It's a kind of a 3D walkthrough of a non-museum, right? Of a museum, but it's that idea that we can actually represent and unite Lebanese art of the modern period around that. Quite fascinating project, and hopefully we'll have at a future iteration of the Digital Humanities Institute a course on how one does such virtual walkthroughs, right? Second, very big and well-funded project out of the Doha Graduate Center in Qatar, the Doha Historical Dictionary of Arabic. Right? One of the things that we've had in Western languages is an engagement with technology for a very long time to build corpora and to build language resources that allow for advanced research to take place. That's not so much the case of other big languages in the research record, like Arabic. This is a very, very large project. It's a lot of people involved in it. Third, Visualizing Palestine, which I found out about just a couple months ago. Very interesting project that began using data, and in some cases, actually data created by the Israeli government to create interactive visualizations of what's happening in Palestine, what has happened in the past, and what continues to happen there. And so this is an interesting organization and digital project in the sense that they've moved from largely in the past a kind of infographic style like approach of transmitting and distributing information to more interactive forms of digital storytelling. I think I have two number threes, sorry about that. Number 3 beasts, right? Number 3A, Memories of the Suez Canal. Project that's been actually around in gestation for a long time. It comes from the Biblioteca Alexandrina, the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, that actually attempts to, as you can see, to pull together all different kinds of resources, right? From oral histories to documentation to different forms of, do you want to call them like ephemera, right? Having to do with this particular important moment in Egyptian history. This one, it's a bit of self-promotion. It's actually something that I did with my colleague Nesha Jacques, who's on the organizing committee. And it's an interesting digital project in the sense that it actually had an end to it. We translated an interface, which is perhaps not what you would think about when you think about a digital project, right? Well, we took the Voyant Tools suite that is also called Paper Tools from Canada that have been developed by Jeffrey Rockwell and Stefan Sinclair as a way of creating a low barrier, web-based reading environment, digital reading environment. And we took that interface, which could process Arabic texts, but didn't have an Arabic interface itself, and we pushed that into Arabic, so that you could actually work in the interface in Arabic and do, I don't know, text in Croatian. The idea being that it expands the community of users of not, I don't want to say simple, but low barrier text analysis on Corpora. Sanduq al-Dunya, new project, Danish-Egyptian collaboration, very interesting platform that is meant to be a participatory platform. It is about envisaging a future for Egypt post-revolution. And it consists of a lot of different kinds of digital functionality, which I have to be honest, have not even explored, but allows you to go in, to upload things, to browse, to create your own metadata, and to imagine that future collectively in a digital space. And this is an interesting turn, right? Because most of the projects that we've looked at so far have not included a public, right? They've been sort of, or at least maybe the interface idea was about making interface available to the public. But this one is actually including the public as part and parcel of that participatory process of knowledge creation. Another self-promotion, Linguistic Landscapes of Beirut, mentioned by our dean at the beginning. It's a project that Mario and Dalal, who are here, are going to be speaking about, not from a content basis, but from a formal basis and from a social basis on Sunday in the talk, in this mini session called A Day in the Life of a Digital Research, of a digital project, I think it's called that. This is a project in which students went out into the streets, again, a participatory project. Students went out in the streets to find examples of code switching, if you want to call it, written code switching in public language in the streets of Beirut. And it's really quite a fascinating project. With an Amical small grant, we have taken this project and pushed it to the next step, which is to actually take what are images and to make transcriptions of those in YAML, so that we have, for the streets of Beirut, a small archive, a polyglossia, that also happens to be geotagged, so that we can actually look for not just spatial patterns in the metadata that was created about the project, but also in the language which is actually used in the samples. Akasa, Center for Photography at NYU Abu Dhabi, interesting digital project that is aiming at, it's an interesting project that it is both an archive, it's an archive of photography, but it's also attempting to be something like a searchable archive. I mean, they're sort of pushing in the direction of what kind of functionality they would like such an archive to actually have, but representing early days of photography in the Arab world, in Egypt, and in the late Ottoman Empire. We did recently in my classes, in a spatial humanities class in Abu Dhabi, we actually worked on attempting to map the locations of early Istanbulian photography studios, which were located in 2 different parts of that world. One of the reasons that I like this particular project is it's very rich in its content, and yet it's not too defined yet in its execution, right, in its dissemination. Lots of things that could actually become possible with this project. And I missed a slide. Well, there are 2 others. There are 2 other things I'd like to talk about. One is Till Growler's project, the Digital Muktabas, and I think he's going to maybe talk a little bit about that. Till is here at the Orient Institute of Beirut. He's interested in taking, and again, leveraging the power of the crowd to work on what are some key problems in language in our part of the world and digital texts. He unites what are, he calls gray libraries, right? He unites places where there are transcriptions that exist online, but that are not described, or excuse me, are not very well described. We don't know much about their reliability, with actually digitized but non-optically character recognized text. The idea is that by bringing those two panes together, one creates a space in which the crowd, right, there's plenty of examples of this that have been done in the UK, the crowd begins to correct and transcribe, right? And you build, hopefully, a base of power users, as they're called, or super users, of sort of citizen scholars who fuel the creation of text production, basically. They're called also in other places text creation partnerships. And the last slide, which is also missing, I apologize, is from my colleague Elizabeth Campbell, formerly from the Amical Consortium and the American University of Iraq in Sulaymaniyah, and she is actually working on on mapping 10th century Arabic geographic treatises about monasteries, right, in northern Iraq. And she's pushing forward in that in a collaboration with UCLA. Now she's back in the United States working. So, is it really true that digital humanities began in 2010? Right, because all of these projects that I've been talking about basically post-date, they start at 2010. And so what I'd like to do in beginning to wind down this talk is to talk about, and to ask a question, which is who knows the history of Arabic computing? Some publication on it that exists out there, but if we believe Willard McCarty, professor of digital humanities in London, King's College London, famous for his book Humanities Computing, there's actually a 70-year history of the overlap between computation and humanities. So the question, to go back to what I asked in the beginning, is are digital humanities really that new? Or do we just not know the stories that are sitting underneath the surface? I actually would like to claim, and I'm going to use some examples taken from AUB's archive as a kind of micro-study for this, that there is an alignment between computation and problems of language and culture that goes back in the Arab world to at least the 1950s. And the point of origin that I would begin there is with basically the introduction of computation to the GCC countries with the arrival of Aramco and the development of the oil industry. So, to take a quote from the German Historical Institute's DC, in Washington, DC, their series upcoming on social histories of computing, how did the computer transition from an expert technology far away in a room that no one had access to objects of everyday use and research use? How were computers commercially marketed and culturally represented? The archives for this are vast and untapped. They include things like magazines, Arabic computing magazines, photos, reports, all kinds of archival materials in a place like DHABI Library. What they've been able to establish in doing so is that there are some historical centers of Arab world computing. First of all, the GCC, as I mentioned, with the arrival of the oil industry. Second, Tunis, starting in 1975, and to this day, still has a Centre National d'Informatique en Tunisie. Jordan, because of its interest in cultural heritage, was very interested in the production and the sustainability of infrastructures for GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and mapping. And to a certain extent, that's also true in Cairo. There's a really new, interesting book that's just come out called Digital Giza by Derman Manwalian at Harvard University Press, about the very process of remediation, not only of cultural artifacts coming from ancient Egyptian historical sites, but also the changing technologies of computation that allowed for that to be modeled over time. The Arab League was very important, particularly in the 1980s, in trying to set standards for Arabic and for Arabic computation, you know, has been very hard for a long time until the arrival of Unicode. It wasn't worked on very well. And finally, there are universities. So here we go to the fun part of the talk. Well, actually, if we go back, sorry, I'm just going to zip back. This is the first image of computing that we find in images that are available online from Jaffa Library. And what I love about this is this like little tiny crouched over guy in 1968, you know, but clearly wearing a suit, looking into this, whatever it is. Do you know what kind of computer that is? I don't even know, right? But it's a wonderful sort of starting point for a local history of computing. I'm going to zip forward to our, some images from AUB. We've got a very classic kind of IBM 370, right, mainframe sitting over the side. And in the images of these places, they're almost always at AUB, they're not full of people. So the computer center is a space sort of emptied out, right, of human beings. And I'd like to look into that a little bit more. 1980, on the other hand, this image is, and as the tag goes on the website, this is an image of a seminar on computer modeling at AUB in 1980, right? And I love it. There's a lot of ashtrays on that table, right? No computers, right? But clearly, it's not a moment of mobile computing, right? And computers weren't sitting in classrooms, right? It was still a moment of a round table where people mused on such things. If any of you are on social media, you look at Pinterest, go check out women in retro computer ads. Another thing which is actually astonishing about computers and the photographing of computers at AUB is how infrequently women are represented. This is the only figure. There's been a lot of interesting work in digital humanities of late about how computing gets started because of an open market of female labor, particularly in data processing. And I think this is what we get as a snapshot into that, right? We've got this guy who's kind of working with the machines in the back, right? And you've got the data entry, right? The gendered data entry figure in the foreground. So, question to ask, I don't have the answer to it, I don't know if this is right, but is gender in Arab world computing a space of masculine representation? But certainly in the Western world, it's more like, a computer is more like a car. You put a picture, you can see these, and some of these are actually not retro, they're actually faux retro. They're you know, like the one I think in the upper left-hand corner is actually rather recent. Here's some people we might even know in the room, right? Some people in the room might even be pictured in these images. And this I'm calling kind of the move from centers to labs. With the arrival of what is essentially the microcomputer, the personal computer, right? And your office, as I understand it, originally was called the Personal Computing Unit or something like that. I'm speaking to our CIO. But there's a history of even the way that the organization of computing technology in our own university has unfolded that's worth looking at. 82 is Eli Salem, right, cutting the ribbon at what was, I believe, the business school's first computing cluster, and this is 1982. This is, by the way, the first computer that my dad bought me, an Apple II Plus, if I'm not mistaken. That's what's sitting there. In 86, this is actually the health and medical library. And this is they're working on, right? That's right. Working on like getting access to digital materials for the medical library. And on the right is probably my favorite one, Qasim Shaban and company inaugurating what was FISC 204, it used to apply. FISC 204, if you remember, were this kind of, it was a language lab. So these are interesting, it's a kind of a spectrum of how computing comes in and what it's used for AUB, right? It starts in business in the height of the Lebanese Civil War, some of the difficult moments of the Lebanese Civil War. Keeps going, goes to the medical library, and then moves on into humanities and actually to language instruction, right? Thinking about language instruction. And by the way, Well, you notice that when we move to labs, we move to people, right? Labs as a space, they're a social space, and they really need to be thought about as such. So computing for the humanities will not be necessarily only things far away like cloud computing or high-performance computing, but will also be in the facilitating of spaces of knowledge production, knowledge activity. So just in case you thought that DH didn't exist at AUB, here's some post-war pre-DH events. First time 11, 1991, computers in arts, a lecture featuring audio-visual displays, I love it, printed out on a dot matrix printer, right? A set of students from CCE, computer engineering, who were interested in the overlap between what computers and arts could actually do. In the middle, we move on to 1993, and we actually got like demand, and there's writing about this, about how in the post-war period, being a computer dealer in Beirut was a good business. People wanted to populate, and so what we've got even here are our extension programs that push off to offer classes and what it means to do personal computing. And finally, this is that unit, the MC2C2 and PC support unit, right? Teaching people how to make Macintosh applications. This is in 1994. And then more recently, 2006, 2012, you've got modeling of machines with Da Vinci, right? And then on the right-hand side, 3D, a lecture on 3D depictions, 3D models of the Dome of the Rock, Jerusalem. What I want to bring your attention to, though, in bringing all these up, is that on the left, for the first time in Lebanon, right, and on the right, Macintosh applications all emerge from computer science departments or computer engineering departments. And these two events are also being sponsored largely by computer science. So the point in bringing this up is that there is a prehistory to digital humanities in our own institution, and it sits on that other side of campus where we're not necessarily interacting with people. And there are some interesting places to go with that. In the Department of English here at AUB, we've actually had some really, really successful incursions, you might call them, forays, I don't know what the right word that doesn't sound too military is, into that department to get people working on projects that are of common interest. So I'd like to end by saying that I really think there's a need for a social history of Arabic computing, or Arab computing, we should probably call it, from the 1950s to the present. We need to look at its actors, we need to look at its representations, we need to look at its attempts at modeling aspects of language and culture, its nation-specific cooperations, and here I mean when Lebanon goes off and works with Denmark, right? Or when Egypt goes off and works with Germany. I'm just making those up, right? And it's also, we need a history of its abandoned projects. And those projects are often the things that sit in closets that chairs of departments like myself in 2010 when I became chair and became, I need to crunch, the crunch for space, I think I threw away. So this is the last part called the DHABI 2017 primer. It's in 2 slides. There are a bunch of courses on offer today. We've got optical character recognition for Arabic, extremely important research field right now. How do we take the printed legacy of Arabic and push it into an electronic format so that we can actually search it, analyze it, and think about it using the power of a computer? And until we solve that problem, whether it be by better algorithms or by simply leveraging the power of the crowd to do some of that work for us, until we get there, we're going to be held back. We've got plain text markdown and PennDoc taught by Till. Till's interested in a minimal approach to putting things, representing things online. Really interesting textual workflow. Those of you who are not interested in things that die, but that are sustainable, will want to go and talk with Till. Digital editing. Magdalena Troskot was here visiting from the Dixit Consortium is teaching digital editing. How do you take text and do textual scholarship and do it in a digital realm? What are the norms for that, and what are the ways that once one has edited work, one can then turn around, represent, and manipulate that? And finally, did textual analysis with Voyant tools, and this is going to be Rayanne. with the help of Najla. And I put these four together because they represent the kind of textual humanities core of what we're going to be doing at the Institute. Next course is Python for Humanists. For those of you who don't know what Python is a programming language. It's one of the programming languages of choice that humanists like to learn. Very good for manipulating textual data. Taught by a part-time instructor in the computer science department. These, by the way, for all of these courses which have to do somehow with textual humanities, really span those co-learning, that question of the co-learning and co-teaching, span the roles of our institutions. We've got librarians, we've got researchers, we've got instructional designers, and we've got instructors in computer science. Finally, on this slide, we've got Omeka, which is a platform that was created at the Royal Rosenzweig Center for New Media and Digital History. I hope I got that right. Easy way of making digital exhibits. So the librarians in the room who've got a lot of digital objects can begin to collate those and begin to curate those in smaller, more contained, more contextualized, and more explained form. And finally, from the Balmain group, we've got building a web-enabled database-driven DH project using Drupal. Drupal and Omeka are different kinds, like WordPress or other things, are different kinds of what we call content management systems. How do we take the stuff that we have in digital format, and then how do we build it out into web-based representation? Second slide of these different courses, we've got podcasting and sound production. We're thinking about how to deal with sound in a digital space, but also how to create, and those of you who know what a podcast is, right? Podcast is a highly democratized form of sound publishing. How to create those? What are the norms for that? What are the best practices for doing that? Mapping, my own course, is going to be looking at different forms of coming up with spatial data, thinking about how you can represent them. Game design is going to look at theories of games, but also narrative, and think about how those two things actually fit together. And SketchUp, which if you don't know what SketchUp is a 3D modeling. So this is kind of the chunk of DHABI, which is about the non-textual, or that which has been derived from the textual. And finally, we've got two courses which are probably the most, they focus on praxis and pedagogy and the social element of our engagement with technology. And those are digital pedagogy in a regional context, given by Maha and Nadine from Cairo, and finally, Day in the Life of the Digital Research Project, which I brought to your attention, Bilal and Mario. So I put up here, the slides are available or openly available. Here are some readings, if you like. These are in addition to the readings that are on the DHIB website. There's a little tab for readings of open source, open access materials, not open source, open access materials for learning about the digital humanities. Here are some things that go into my talk today and the framing of my talk today. And finally, I just want to thank archives for putting those images up online. It's amazing to have those available to us. I wish there were some more that I'd like to have access to. The organizing committee at DHIB for their incredible work. The following people around the art world who have helped me collect this, to collate this group of projects that I'm talking about. And to Padmini Murray in Bangalore at the Shrishti Institute for having suggested to me in 2015 for the first time that we need a social history of regional computing. And finally, the Raid Achidee and Comex, who were the original audience for this paper. Thank you very much.
Questions, comments?
If you could just say who you are, so that there's so many people we've invited and people we know, and I don't know who all of you are, so just say your name. Appreciate it.
Hi, this is Cinderella from LAU. Cinderella Hubbard from LAU. Now, after attending this presentation, would you say that digital humanities, I've been thinking about the definitions, the different definitions, could be defined as a small digital archive project? Because going through these projects in your presentation, it looks like archiving, but in a specific topic related to humanities.
Sure. Okay, so the answer to your question is absolutely,
Okay.
right? I mean, I actually think that archivists, I mean, we have a lot of people in the room who are trained archivists, right? Who have been archiving and building things in pre-digital and now in digital environments, right? And the archivists and the librarians in the room really, really like metadata. They really, really like sustainability. And you know what? A digital humanist has a field day, is thrilled to find good metadata. So I would actually say, to answer your question, that archivists should be interested in digital humanities because it's what allows their archives to be used and to be discovered. That's right. Right. It's not just putting things in. Yeah, please. I mean, we have librarians in the room with reactions, right? So go ahead, please.
Just what I wanted to say, like discovery is also part of librarians' work, not only metadata.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Metadata is for the reason for discovery.
That's right. So definitely, you want to create that. And then if you look at some of the projects, like the Linguistic Landscapes of Beirut project that was course embedded, it was actually built from smartphone pictures that were taken, that were fed into a database in geotag. That we were actually creating an archive at the same time that we were creating a digital project, right? So the flow depends on the availability of materials that you have, right? Some digital humanists, the reason that I mentioned Till's project, that I missed the slide for, sorry, Till, is that so interesting is that he's sort of pulling from different archives, pulling those spaces together to make something which is better, right, than, it's a better representation of those texts. And then hopefully that will actually then move to the next step and be reused by someone else. So definitely. Thanks for the question.
Any other question?
Thank you very much. Edith Tamanza, I'm the Director of Libraries at the American College of Humanities. So thank you, this was very interesting, very exciting. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask, is there, since you're so involved with these on humanities, is there somebody, some organization that curates or let's say lists all the different projects that are happening right now? Because it would be very exciting for us to see. I mean, obviously you mentioned some today. Is there a good place that somebody can go and see what's happening on the world right now?
Right. So thanks for the question. I mean, I think one of the things that I was trying to do here today was to do a first pass, right, through what's happening in your world. And I think there are projects out there that I haven't been able to mention, and perhaps we can start a little doc, right, and put our minds together for that. So yes, I mean, are there places that are listed? The problem, I mean, lists are a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
Lists are amazing. They allow us to do all kinds of amazing things, discover all kinds of things, put things together, right? Match things and find things. The problem with lists is that lists also go out of date, right? And lists change and URLs change and something like that. So yes, there are places I can point you in some directions, right? There's some places where you can look at projects, but there are so many things nowadays that I don't think we have a single repertory, right, or a single place where you might find that. Now, the interesting thing for the librarians in the room would be, what would you want to do with the remnants of these projects? You know, I mean, I think one of the things that we're going to stress in the life of the digital project is that those materials are being actively ingested into the repository in different forms and described at AUB so that they exist even if the project goes down, right? My domain is no longer active or whatever. So it's a hard thing, right? Because you want to create lists, but then lists don't necessarily keep up with, they don't keep up with the dynamism of the profession.
And is there a community listed or something?
There are lots of them. My suggestion is get on Twitter and go look up digital humanities and you will find thousands of people around the world there. You're welcome.
Since I'm not the English department, AUB, first of all, thank you for a very interesting survey of what's happening in the Arab world. Second of all, it's lovely to have you amongst us again. My question was a very small detail because I was busy tweeting. I missed AUB, I missed the part where you were talking about the Palestine project. Is that by Israel?
No.
Is that what you said?
No. What I think is interesting about that project, no, it's actually being done, and I'm blanking on the name of the person who does the Palestine. It's someone who's here in Lebanon, but also works in London, and I forgot the name. Yeah, the link is just visualizing Palestine dot one of the extensions that we have available to us. You can find it easily by Googling. But it's not done by Israel. That's the interesting thing about it, is that it's actually reuses open government data. So they have interesting visualizations, for example, about the erosion of villages, right, by the creation of settlements. And that available, this is what I understand. I don't know the project extremely well, but it's an interesting case where you actually have a kind of an interesting activism, right, using open data from the other side, right, to tell a digital story about what's happening in this part of the world. And it exists in both Arabic and in English, and it exists alongside, if I'm not mistaken, the Palestinian Museum, which also exists in both virtual and real presence. There's actually a building, but there's also a virtual part. So if you're interested in, if anybody's here from the museum sector, interested in curation of museums, I mean, digital humanities is a must. Something to learn nowadays, right? It's something, one of the ways it allows us to work with data and information, whatever, that exists out there that can be disseminated publicly, hopefully on the web.
Thanks so much. My name is Anne from University of Switzerland. I was curious about how the digital humanities pushes, so my question is, how does digital humanities, or how do digital humanities push copyright issues?
Right. So one of the pillars, if you took a look at some of the readings that we put up on the site, I mean, digital humanities wants, and digital humanists are they enjoy, or they like the open culture, open data question. There are some debates about that exists on the inside of that community. Copyright is a problem, obviously. I mean, and one of the reasons that we have to create complex assemblages like Till's project and Digital Mythobus is because different materials were created by different organizations for different people who pay money to have access to them, right? So the idea of bringing together that which is openly available and that which is not openly available in different formats. I think the crowd transcription part of the digital humanities has a lot of issues about this. They have to work out deals with people who hold the rights. There's a really interesting project from that's built on top of English, 18th century collections online, I think I got that right, and on the Evo, the early English books online, where you have a layer or skin that's built on top of those projects so that you can actually transcribe, and at the same time you only see a tiny bit of the image. So in other words, you're only accessing what a copyright holder of a particular material allows you to access, but the process is still creating something which is open, right? So there are lots of ways I think that digital humanists are just forced to work with copyrights these days, or work around them, but not holding their projects, their end goal of their projects to be something which is commercializable, right, or monetizable, if that exists as a word. It could be monetized. The idea being that they don't want it then locked down yet again by someone else, right? They'd actually like that the products of their work to be reused by other people. So one place to look here is the Creative Commons movement, right? The Creative Commons licenses. When you look at digital projects, they very often have a Creative Commons license associated with them, which is that, if you don't know what that is essentially a form of license that is self-declared by the producer of information that says this can circulate with no citation, This can be circulate with citation. This can circulate with citation, and you can remix it and reuse it. So in other words, whatever you feel comfortable about encouraging a community to do with the materials that you have, you can embed that into the very functionality and the very presence of those materials.
Scott, is this Solutions and also Technical Initiative Technical Council? I had a comment because I was delighted to see you trying to determine if DH is a global thing or how the centers come up and how this all develops. And I really like your comment about the social tissue because personally I think it is a key to digital humanities because as you said, we have basically 70 years of history of using computers in humanities in one way or another, just people would not think about themselves as doing digital humanities. And I bet that here in Lebanon, as in every other country, there are humanities. So I would love some investigation on how actually centers come to be, because quite often I think if the social tissue, it's dedicated individuals that bring the notion of digital humanities and create the community locally and connect with the broader one.
Right.
And I think a slight note to you, this is maybe why there is no list, no one authority to create that list to include or exclude people from the list.
Right.
Because it is, a very liquid movement.
Can I just add something? I mean, after what you said and after all this discussion, I think I'm looking into this from having my, let's say, academic librarian hat, and I've seen repositories of teaching, let's say, content that academic teachers have created and put into repositories for sharing using Creative Commons licenses. So maybe looking forward in the future, we may see examples of digital projects, let's say, being uploaded in a central repository where people can go in and reuse, adapt, and then share with the community using the right license. Okay,
Right.
so this was what it was in my head about when
Right.
talking about this.
So I just had a conversation with a colleague, former medievalist and digital humanist at Fordham University in New York just the other day about this, and we were talking about the performativity of projects and the kind of the social quality of projects. One thing that's interesting, I mean, I was trying to focus on the idea of a project, not on data only, right? Not on preservation, right? Or not on, but what is that space in which digital work gets done? And it's actually hard to archive that. It's hard to upload the social relations in a lab, right? I mean, I guess you can make a network of it and upload the network data at it, but it's a little hard, right? I mean, it's not.
It's complex.
It's complex, and so digital projects also exist in versions, right? And those versions, depending on where they sit, get more or less traction. They get more or less attention. And they have different publics that engage with them because of that. So the data from our Linguistic Landscapes project is going to go up on GitHub, but I know that people who are interested in multilingualism and Beirut are not going to go to GitHub to take that and look at it there. They want to see it on an interactive map. I think in the back. Yeah.
I'm Willie Bakhan at DHABI. Thank you, David, for the interesting information, and I'm learning a lot today. I just have a question. You put the map where we saw all these digital DH centers around the world.
Yep.
Is there any initiative to connect these together, to have more collaboration between these centers? Are you working, or is there any initiative to work with like NRELs of the world to get these connected so we can have more, richness in the information?
Right. So there's two questions in what you asked. The first one is, are centers connected? And I think that centers are connected by the traditional ways that academic bodies are connected. They're connected by collective grant writing. They're connected by co-authorship. Sometimes they're connected by the fact that they fall within the same territory, and so therefore have access to the same, let's say, infrastructures or resources. There are certainly big infrastructural projects that exist, right, in the digital humanities world, and all you have to do is type big infrastructure digital humanities, and you'll find plenty of examples of those. But the second question the second part of the question was about, like, are there attempts to kind of help fledgling centers get going? I think that falls much more into the kind of soft relationships that exist between, as Magdalena put it, these kind of committed people. Committed people find other committed people who want to make that happen, and I think that they support each other in these kind of informal, not in completely informal, but in soft methods. Like they're not necessarily funded, space-connected kinds of ways, right, hard ways. But I actually had that conversation in Sydney at the ADHO conference. There was actually a panel about global digital humanities, and I asked the room, okay, I'd like to start a digital humanities center. Does anybody here want to be my mentor? And everybody's like, ooh, that sounds like a really good idea. And then no one said yes. So, I mean, I think, no, yeah, I have to get it. There are plenty of people who could be mentors, right? But that's that's where, again, I feel like the power of the edges in the network, right, determine whether those things actually happen. This institute started in 2015 because Ray Siemens told me, hey David, why don't you just do an institute? And he put literally the bug in my ear, right? And that was end of 2013, 14. And I thought, yeah, why don't I do that? And then I was, and then again. Thanks for the question. Hi, Giselle.
Hi, David. I'm Giselle Penpetian from LAU. My question is, should we be concerned with the archive, as you mentioned before, material, and based on who's sponsoring what, and the perspective, and the subjective part of posting and adding the material that is open to the public in different, based on those different projects. Should we be concerned as faculty about the reliability of the material, credibility of the material, etc.?
Yeah. So you're talking about the reliability and the ethics of data in a way,
Absolutely.
right?
Based on who's funding what, how do you think we need to manage that?
Sure. There are, I don't know, that's sort of like saying, how do you, it's like information, that's an information literacy question, right? I mean, it comes from, and a fake news question, kind of wrapped all into one. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that it's hard to know it's hard to know what you get.
I think policies protect us. We have policies that protect us.
Well, there is a whole ethics and politics to working with data. I mean, I think that's built into all kinds of academic research. I think we're held accountable to the ways that we use and reuse data by the things we publish about it and the kind of claims we make on it. And if we're not making claims on that about bad data, someone's going to call us out on that. So I think there are ways there could be institutional policy ways, but I think that the larger profession also self-regulates a bit on that one. I think we have time for one more question. They're telling me.
Yeah.
So, we can talk about this. We're going to talk about this for the next 2.5 days, right? So don't be worried that you won't get a chance to have this conversation.
Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Karabayev from American University in Central Asia. Thank you very much for your inspiring and interesting presentation. Afterwards, I have so many ideas. And I have just a small technical question. Do we need to really develop computer science skills in order to be successful in the humanities science projects?
So your question echoes a lot of debates that exist out there. Should digital humanists be coders, right? Should we know how to do that? My feeling about that, I don't want to say yes. I'm learning multiple languages. I kind of constantly throw myself into opportunities to learn things. I was just in a session in Abu Dhabi on Jquery the other day. I want to know how a computer works because I want to know how to talk to my colleagues who are going to be doing some of the heavy lifting for me, right? I also want to be able to create things of my own fabrication and I'm very aware of the fact that I am not going to create what my colleagues in computer science will be able to do. So that's a personal response to that. I think you should understand how a computer works. And I think that one of the things you do in the Digital Humanities Institute, which some people call a boot camp, or I don't know, that has all kinds of weird military metaphors associated with it, right? Is you get down in the trenches, another military metaphor, right? You get your hands dirty. I don't know if that's a military metaphor, but you try to interact with platforms or data or, and that itself gives you ideas about how you can bring your research fields closer to, maybe, an interaction and a potential collaboration. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Some housekeeping business. You all have schedules, I mean, especially those coming from out of AUB. There's also a map. In each classroom, there would be at least 2 or 3 people from AUB that would lead you to where the faculty lounge is, where we're having our lunch, and where the different classes are. There's also 2 usernames and Wi-Fi passwords. And the good thing is, if your institution is a member of EduRoam, you can connect to Wi-Fi by using your institution credentials. So let's group and head to our classes.